Hello, everyone! I am back with the third and final episode of this month's Deep Dive series, Jewelry as Magical Symbol. This month's topic has been a veritable bottomless pit of information, going back 100,000 years to the first known jewelry finds and ending right after the Hellenistic Greeks in episode 2. If you're tuning in for the first time, I recommend you go back and listen to the last 2 episodes first. If you start here, you're going to be missing out on a lot of relevant background information and context. If you're all caught up and want some visual references for the pieces we've been discussing, the last few weeks of Deep Dive Wednesday videos have featured some of the most important finds. You can find those videos on my Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube page, all under the username moonhoney.jewelry. If you are a paid Patreon member or Instagram subscriber, your bonus episode will be available tomorrow. The majority of you voted for a video about the connection between earrings and witchcraft in Han Dynasty China, which was a fascinating topic I was very happy to learn more about, and I am super excited to share it with you. If you'd like access to bonus content and the ability to vote on future video topics, you can join at patreon.com/ancient history jewelry stories or subscribe on Instagram. We have a lot of ground to cover in this episode, where I'm going to attempt to conclude our very long look at the history of jewelry as magical symbol. We've covered just about 100,000 years of jewelry history, making our way through jewelry finds from various ancient hominid groups, the ritual wearing of gold adornments in ancient Mesopotamia, the abundance of amulets in ancient Egypt, the intertwining of religious beliefs and jewelry spanning Greek cultures from the Minoans to the Hellenistic Greeks. And now we're on to the next chapter in this history, the Ptolemaic and Roman periods in Egypt, and how Hellenistic and Egyptian beliefs and cultural ideas about jewelry intertwine to create new and distinct forms of magical symbol, as well as an exciting blending of aesthetics. This is a great place to pick up where I left off the last episode. Serpents. Snake jewelry is abundant in ancient Egypt, as well as classical and Hellenistic Greece. It really starts to find its stride in the Ptolemaic period, which is a big chunk of the Hellenistic era during which Egypt was ruled by the Ptolemies, a Macedonian dynasty of rulers that began with a general of Alexander the Great's, Ptolemy I, starting in 305 BCE and ending with the death of Cleopatra VII, the famous one, in 30 BCE. This also overlaps with ancient Rome during the time of the Roman Republic, which was active from 509 to 27 BCE. Alexander the Great conquered Persian-controlled Egypt during his campaign against the Achaemenid Persians in 332 BCE, but he died not long after, in 323. Ptolemy, who was one of his most trusted companions, won the right to rule Egypt, and the city Alexander had founded, Alexandria, I know, very imaginative, soon became its capital. This port city was the entryway through which Greek culture flowed into Egypt, bringing with it the Olympic pantheon of gods and goddesses. The new monarchy, while rigorously maintaining its Hellenistic traditions, portrayed itself in Egyptian style and clothing on public monuments. By the second generation of Ptolemies, they had adopted the Egyptian custom of marrying their siblings. It seems that it took them no time at all to decide that they were going to adopt the custom of incest. Okay, snakes. We were talking about snakes. If you've been watching my videos for a while, then you know that I simply adore ancient snake jewelry. The ancient Egyptians adored it too, usually in the form of a rearing cobra known as a uraeus, which is often found on headdresses and crowns. Once the Greeks showed up, snake jewelry really boomed in the form of just about every kind of adornment. Headdresses, bracelets, armlets, necklaces, earrings, rings, pendants. There are hundreds of examples of beautiful, sinuous serpents crafted in gold from Egypt, Greece, and Rome. In Egypt, the snake was a symbol of royalty and protection. In Greece and Ptolemaic Egypt, it was a symbol of fertility, rebirth, and health. In Rome, it was a symbol of fortune and fertility. Snake jewelry was worn by children and women alike, and with the exception of ancient Egypt, was not worn by men. In ancient Greece and Rome, men only wore rings and fibulae, or pins, generally used to clasp or hold their capes and garments in place. Very, very rarely, they wore armlets, which are bracelets meant to be worn on the upper arm. Snake jewelry from Ptolemaic Egypt, the rest of Hellenistic Greece, and the Roman world looks remarkably similar. There are incredibly detailed pieces, complete with individual carved scales and intricate faces, as well as very simple, stylized representations of snakes. Due to its ability to survive the ravages of time unscathed, most of the examples we have of snake jewelry are made out of gold. But there was almost certainly snake jewelry made out of copper and silver as well. It was a universally loved and worn symbol, considered to be an especially potent form of magic. This is evident by the abundance of snake jewelry, as well as the multiple examples of snake bracelets made in children's sizes. Like the tilapia amulet of Egypt, the snake seems to have been a protective symbol worn by children more often than other symbols. An interesting point to note is that, in all of my obsessing over ancient snake jewelry, I have not seen any jewelry in the form of an Ouroboros, or Ouroboros, which is a depiction of a snake eating its tail. I get asked this almost every time I make a video about ancient snake jewelry, and I have come to the conclusion that it was not something that was done in ancient Egypt, Greece, or Rome. Initially, it was an Egyptian symbol, and it represented infinity and wholeness, death and rebirth. It is, to my knowledge, only found on seals and amulets, and never in the form of, say, a bracelet in the shape of a snake eating its tail. The use of jewelry as magical symbol throughout Ptolemaic Egypt is not that different from its use in previous periods of Egyptian history, or its use in Hellenistic Greece. Amulets were as popular as ever, and miniature representations of gods and goddesses, both Olympic and Egyptian, were equally in style. While the use of jewelry as a symbol of protection, devotion, and belief didn't change much during this period, the melding of Egyptian and Greek sensibilities led to an entirely new aesthetic, as well as the combining of various deities to create new ones. I personally find the look of Ptolemaic and Roman-era Egyptian jewelry and art to be especially exciting, as it combines some of the best elements from all three cultures. While ancient Rome was in its Republican period, and very heavily influenced by classical and Hellenistic art and ideas, their use of jewelry as magical symbol didn't deviate that much from how the Egyptians and Greeks were using it. One major difference between Greek and Roman jewelry was the Roman preference for colorful gemstones, utilizing a variety of different colored stones in a single piece of jewelry. They, like the Greeks, believed that different gemstones carry different protective qualities, along with the properties imbued by the different metals used. Another notable difference was that the ancient Romans were, essentially, mass-producing their jewelry, using a variety of dyes and stamps to shape metals quickly and consistently. Faux gemstones, in the form of convincing, brilliantly colored cut glass, were all the rage. The more colorful, the better. While amulets were definitely very popular in ancient Rome, their use seems to have been reserved almost exclusively for the adornment and protection of children. While jewelry associated with gods and goddesses wasn't uncommon, it was not as popular as it had been in Greece. The figural miniatures of the Hellenistic Greeks rarely make an appearance. Instead, the Romans favored carved jewels, naturally, with elaborate intaglios and cameos depicting deities and historical figures taking their place. Within the category of inscribed stones was one particular kind of stone, magic gems. These stones essentially held the same place as amulets in Roman culture, starting in the Republican era but really growing in popularity during imperial times, from 27 BCE to 476 CE. Much like the mix-and-match quality of Greek jewelry, with the stones and metals and symbols combining to form an intentional magical symbol with layered meaning, the Roman magic gems combined stones, inscribed words, which were known as logoi, and images of people and animals, to create protective and otherwise beneficial jewels. These were used to deal with any kind of problem, from mundane ailments, like ingrown toenails, to love spells for those attempting to catch the eye of someone special. You might find a stone with the image of a uterus to aid in childbirth, or one with the image of an eagle, paired with a prayer asking to be granted strength. These stones not only showed Roman gods, but Egyptian ones too, sometimes elevating incredibly minor deities to a higher status through their depiction on these magic gems, and sometimes making up deities out of whole cloth, such as the rooster-headed, snake-footed Angoipus, also known as Abraxas, who shows up on many inscribed Roman gems. There are over 4,000 known magic gems from ancient Rome, scattered throughout private and museum collections around the world. They're made from all manner of stones, from hematite to amethyst, lapis lazuli to carnelian. If that many are known to exist, imagine just how many are still lying undiscovered. I've made a point of mentioning that jewelry was the domain of women in many ancient cultures, with the exception of the Mesopotamians. The ancient Romans weren't much different, with men wearing mostly rings, although, at this point, with the popularity of inscribed magic gems, as well as large, colorful gems in general, men were wearing larger, brighter, gaudier rings than ever, and for the first time, were wearing more than one. Before I move on from this time period and region of the world entirely, I do want to acknowledge that I'm leaving out the Persians, whose own luxurious crafts and exquisite metalsmithing influenced the decadence of ancient Greek, Egyptian, and Roman life. Their jewelry was heavy with repeating symbols, often animals or mythological figures. Griffins, lions, bulls, and rams feature heavily in Achaemenid and later Persian jewelry, with other animals like ducks making an occasional appearance. The lion and griffin, two enduring symbols of Persian culture, were both protective, as well as strong cultural symbols, meant to telegraph the power and richness of the Persian Empire to their neighbors and enemies. The lion represented strength, courage, and dominion, while the griffin was a symbol of protection and divine power. Jewelry with these symbols indicated a loyalty to the Achaemenid Empire. They were even emblazoned on temple walls, sword handles, and made into golden plaques and appliques to be attached to clothing and horse fittings. Thanks to the conquest of Alexander the Great, there is a definite blurring of the lines between Persian and Hellenistic jewelry in the ensuing centuries. I know I've left out some tantalizing cultures with incredible gold jewelry, like the Thracians, the Sarmatians, the Colchis of Georgia, and the Scythians, but they are so deeply intertwined with the customs and aesthetics of the Hellenistic world that I will leave them off the plate for now. Instead, let's hop on over to the British Isles, a part of the world that has historically been rich in alluvial, or river, deposits of gold. The main inhabitants of this area during the Iron Age, that is, 1600 BCE to 400 CE, were the Celts, with the Romans moving in on their territory in the 1st century CE. Roman influence was obvious in their jewelry long before their conquest, but that isn't meant to imply that the Celts didn't have their own distinct forms of adornment and jewelry as magical symbol. Grave finds, especially those found with women, show an incredible array of gold bracelets, armlets, and massive torques, which are ornate and enormous gold rings meant to be worn around the neck. Earrings, rings, and chains were not really popular until the Roman conquest. So despite what I just said, with rings being less popular, some of my favorite Celtic pieces happen to be rings. Dating back to the 5th or 4th century BCE, there is a small collection at the Metropolitan Museum of Art of what are known as Celtic face rings. These are beautiful, ornate rings with exceptionally symmetrical designs showing stylized human and animal faces. These seem to show a veneration of nature, with the human faces possibly representing a type of nature deity. Now, back to the giant gold rings worn around the neck, torques. Believed to have been worn by men, women, and children, and routinely found in pits as sacred votives or offerings, this form of adornment started out as a plain iron ring, and eventually morphed into incredibly detailed, heavy, and valuable gold neck pieces. Some of the known Celtic torques weigh over a kilo, which is about 2.2 pounds. These incredibly beautiful and unusual pieces of jewelry definitely indicated status, but they were likely also thought of as a protective form of personal armor. Celtic gods, as well as warriors, are depicted in their art as wearing torques. There is definitely an argument to be made that this was a handy way to carry around your personal wealth, but the presence of incredibly large and intricate torques made out of lower value materials, such as silver-plated iron, seemed to indicate that this was not their primary reason for existing. While we may not know exactly what the magical symbolism behind torques truly was, there is yet another clue that points to their extreme importance. When they are found outside of funerary tombs and graves, they are more often than not found in groups, including multiple torques looped together to form a kind of chain, as well as broken torques. This hints at their greater spiritual significance to the Celts. As more and more Roman influence spread over to the British Isles, with the eventual conquest of the Celts entirely, the Celtic people adopted all manner of Roman jewelry customs, including the wearing of earrings, chains, and multiple finger rings. From the 1st century CE onward, the lines are too blurred to really parse the spiritual differences between Celtic and Roman adornment in the British Isles, although Celtic aesthetic sensibilities remained present in jewelry, and also spread throughout the rest of the Roman Empire. For instance, the Celts had a fondness for red enamel, which eventually made its way into Roman jewelry fashions. I think we've spent plenty of time discussing the Eurasian cultures and their use of jewelry as magical symbol, but now I would like to bring us halfway across the world so that we can get cozy with some Mesoamerican and Andean beliefs regarding jewelry as magical symbol. Multiple cultures, entirely isolated from any kind of ancient Greco-Roman or Eurasian influence, independently created strikingly sophisticated methods of metalsmithing, as well as rituals and beliefs surrounding the sacred art of adornment. You may be familiar with the incredible gold, silver, and jade jewelry of the Maya, the wonderful gold pieces of the Inca, and the striking sculptural goldwork of the Mexica, who are often referred to as the Aztecs, but for various reasons, mostly people of actual Mexica descent asking me to use this name instead, I will not be referring to them as Aztec. There are other cultures with beautiful and significant spiritual practices concerning jewelry. There's the La Tolita people of Ecuador, the Nahua, the Mixtec, Olmec, Zapotec, the Teotihuacan of Mexico, the Diquis people of Costa Rica, the Muisca and Quimbaya of Colombia, the Chiribaya of Peru, countless others. Unfortunately, there are also countless cultural records and artifacts destroyed by the Spanish and other European colonization of the Americas. So some of what we know, and which cultures we can attribute certain finds to, is blurry. Those fuckers have to come up in almost every single episode, and I am so tired of having to beat the dead horse that is Spanish colonialism. Throughout Mesoamerican cultures, that is, those spanning the area between central Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, and a bit of Honduras, prized copper, silver, and gold, but they had one favorite material that they considered more valuable, more divine, more powerful than all others: jade. In modern times, as well as in some ancient Asian cultures, jade refers to two different but very similar stones, jadeite and nephrite. Sailor Moon fans, what's up? It was long thought that nephrite does not exist in Mesoamerica, though this is a misconception brought on by the fact that Mesoamerican artisans vastly preferred to work with jadeite. Most jade objects found in this part of the world will be made of jadeite, with a smattering of objects made from lookalike stones, such as chrysoprase and green quartzite. Modern archaeology is still unearthing the various deposits from which quality jade was mined by pre-Columbian cultures, and it's clear by the abundance of objects, as well as variations in colors and translucence, that there had to have been a handful of sources. Jade was carved into all manner of objects, from ceremonial axe heads to pendants, masks, ear spools, which were worn in stretched earlobes, figurines, tooth inlays, which were embedded into incisor teeth, as well as small square or rectangular plaques intended to adorn garments and belts. It seemed to have the same symbolic significance to all Mesoamerican cultures. Because it was the color of water and vegetation, it represented both life and death. It was also associated with the sun and the wind. The Maya placed jade beads in the mouths of the deceased, in much the same way Greeks left a coin in the mouth to pay Charon for the inevitable ferry ride to the underworld. Instead of believing it was a form of supernatural payment, the Maya believed that this jade bead, when placed in the mouth of someone about to die, would take the spirit It's very likely that the different colors of jade had varying spiritual significance, although there is not enough information remaining to know for sure. It is speculated that the bright green varieties may have been associated with the young maize god, while blue varieties of jade were particularly prized by the Olmec because it looked like water, associated in Olmec iconography with the underworld. Jade is a fairly hard stone and likely one of the hardest materials known to Mesoamerican cultures, further cementing its status as a revered and mysterious stone. To shape and work jade was a time-consuming, laborious affair, requiring jade tools in order to cut jade itself. This led to even the crafting techniques used to shape jade becoming part of the ritual significance of the stone. Drilling a hole into a finished jade piece was believed to give it life, or animate it. Gold, of course, was also very important to Mesoamerican cultures, with divine significance, though we don't have any examples of goldsmithing predating the 7th century CE. We know that many cultures were incredibly adept metalsmiths, employing sophisticated techniques such as lost wax casting and depletion gilding to create intricate, ornate, astonishingly beautiful votive objects and pieces of jewelry out of gold and silver, sometimes set with jade. Unfortunately, the Spanish also noticed that many cultures were incredibly adept metalsmiths, and both stole and melted down as many gold and silver objects as they could get their hands on. The rare pieces that escaped the crucibles of Spain are ones that weren't found by them in the first place, or the incredibly uncommon cases of Spaniards recognizing the artistic value of one or two pieces of jewelry and bringing them back intact. The exceptionally bitter irony of this is that most Mesoamerican cultures did not ascribe monetary value to gold. It was a useful material, but it was nowhere near as valuable to them as jade or even obsidian, another stone that was highly prized. Some of the most intricate examples we have of jewelry as magical symbol come from the Mexica people, though many of their works have been mistakenly attributed to the Mixtec culture over the years. Mexica goldsmiths were exceptional sculptors of miniatures, creating figural jewelry that rivals the most detailed works of ancient Greece. They believed that gold was the excrement of the gods, and it seems to figure more in religious and ceremonial jewelry than jewelry worn solely for personal adornment. The type of jewelry was as symbolically important as the materials that were being used. One type of adornment, a kind of lip plug known as a labret, also pronounced libre, or tentetl in the Nahuatl language, were a symbol of political power, which was intertwined with spiritual power. Tentetl signified that the wearer was a speaker of eloquence and truth. In Mexica culture, gold seems to have been reserved exclusively for royalty, with the incorruptibility of the material being linked to the enduring power of their rulers. I realize I've left out some key dates to help contextualize the time period we're talking about. The Mixtec culture began the earliest, from around 1500 BCE to 1523 CE. The Maya civilization began around 250 CE, lasted until 1697. The Mexica came a bit later, from 1300 to 1521, and although I'm giving a start and end date for these cultures, I do want to make it clear that there are plenty of Maya, Mixtec, Mexica, and members of other Mesoamerican cultures alive and well today, speaking Nahuatl, Yucatec Maya, and other ancestral languages. Often, we tell these stories and give the sense that there are no descendants of these incredible cultures, further alienating them in history and relegating them to unrelatable fairy tales. Some of the most prevalent symbols in both Mayan and Mexica jewelry are those associated with the feathered serpent god, Kukulkan to the Maya and Quetzalcoatl to the Mexica. In both cultures, he was associated with wind and rains, and as such, is often depicted with symbols representing both, a spiral being a common and recurring motif. The spiral is also associated with the shape of the ear and is further tied to the importance of sound in Mesoamerican adornment. Goldsmiths understood how to mix the perfect alloy of gold to create tonal variation, and as such, many pieces of Mayan, Mixtec, and Mexica jewelry feature jingling bells that would have evoked the wind, brought by their divine feathered serpent. I think this is one of the most beautiful details in any culture's habits of adornment. Moving on to the Andean cultures, we start to see a distinct lack of the one material that was prized above all others in Mesoamerica: jade. Instead, there is a much larger focus on gold, silver, and, astonishingly, early uses of platinum. I'm going to focus on the three that we have the most examples from: the Inca, the Moche, and the La Tolita people. Out of these three, the La Tolita people go back the farthest. Also called the Tumaco culture, with both names coming from the two most notable archaeological sites, their homes span the northern coast of Ecuador and the southern coast of Colombia, from 350 BCE to 400 CE. With a sophisticated grasp of metalsmithing, these people were the first to conscientiously, intentionally work with platinum, a metal that is known for being a pain in the ass even with the benefits of modern technology. They combined gold, silver, and platinum in striking and beautiful ways, both for the look and for the symbolic meaning behind the marriage of these three materials. Jewelry as magical symbol is taken to the extreme here. Two of my favorite pieces from this culture are what are suspected to be shamans' masks, intricate and whimsical pieces made out of contrasting gold and silver, with hanging gem-set eyes of turquoise or chrysocolla and long, dangling gold sheet tears. The eyes of these masks are removable and most likely alluded to a shaman's talent of second sight, the ability to divine the future or see into the spirit world. Their ritual adornment also included many gold headdresses with stylized rays, symbolizing the sun, and animals featured heavily in their jewelry, with eagles, jaguars, frogs, and crabs making an appearance, along with anthropomorphized animal-human hybrids. The next culture, the Moche people, flourished in Peru from 100 to 700 CE. Their use of both silver and gold together is even more striking than that of the La Tolita people. Intricately cut shapes are perfectly fitted together to create dynamic, heavily stylized, arresting designs. There is an energy to Moche art that I can only describe as persistent, with many animals and human depictions staring back at you through knowing and wild eyes. Their use of jewelry as magical symbol is a bit more literal than in other pre-Columbian cultures. There are wildly detailed, gemstone-inlaid earplugs and ear covers depicting images of warriors, nose ornaments with realistic and accurate depictions of shellfish, and the most wonderful necklace made out of half-gold, half-silver peanut shells. These items likely represented what they showed: warrior jewelry for a warrior, shellfish and peanuts to signify and perhaps ask for abundance. Then there are the less literal, more magical images in Moche adornment. The pained, rigid face of a human octopus god with serpent tentacles, turquoise eyes, and white stone teeth, complete with fangs, to be worn as a headdress. Probably some specific deity that was being called upon with the ritualistic wearing of it. A mask in the form of a grimacing humanoid jaguar, complete with blood-red teeth, possibly worn to call upon the attributes of a jaguar or other feline before going into battle. A silver and gold nose ornament, with intertwined two-headed snakes covered in jingling, dangling, musical gold discs. These pieces have meanings lost to time, but the combination of mythological creatures, animals, human warriors, and sacred deities speaks to the importance of jewelry as magical symbol. Lastly, we have the Inca, the powerhouse of the Andean cultures, if only through sheer recognizability. The Incan Empire was around for a much shorter period of time than many other pre-Columbian cultures. Earliest estimates set it at around the 13th century to 1572. The Incas seem to have picked up their traditions and metalsmithing from earlier cultures like the Moche and La Tolita, and a quick Google search shows me that many of the pieces that have been exhibited as and attributed to the Inca over the years actually come from pre-Incan cultures. Unfortunately, Incan culture suffered the misfortune of existing at the same time as the Spanish plundering the Americas. So, unfortunately, so much of their gold and other adornments are lost to time. One thing we do know, though, is that in Inca culture, the very act of wearing jewelry was, yet again, linked to the worship of divinity. They believed that the more gold a person got to wear, the closer they were to the gods. To them, gold was the blood of their sun god, Viracocha. Wearing anything made out of gold was a direct way to worship and honor him. It didn't even need to involve any fussy symbols or special shapes, although it often did anyway. The very act of forming gold was a religious ritual, and goldsmiths occupied a place of importance in Inca culture. Many of these goldsmiths actually were not themselves Inca, but came from conquered neighboring cultures. The Inca themselves did not have a long-standing culture of metallurgy, but they were surrounded by cultures that did. I haven't stressed this for our pre-Columbian cultures, but in every single one, it seems that both men and women wore nearly all forms of jewelry, with very few restrictions, such as the labrets being restricted to warriors and nobility. Though, I will say, very honestly, that I don't know enough to say that there weren't also female warriors in many of these cultures. I had initially intended to continue this conversation through the Byzantine Empire, medieval Europe, and a little closer to modern times, but in the interest of not overwhelming everyone with another 2,000 years of information, I think we will leave that off for another time. I have a feeling I'm going to be picking up this deep dive again in the future. I will, instead, list some of the examples of jewelry as magical symbol that are still in use today. Some of these we covered, some we didn't, but almost all of them have ancient roots and can be traced back to a culture far removed from our modern globalized world. Some of the most obvious ones are going to be religious symbols. Your garden variety cross, crucifix, St. Christopher medallion, Star of David, chai symbol. There are various forms of prayer beads, whether worn around the neck or simply carried in your pocket, used in Islam, various forms of Buddhism, and by Christians. Then we have your protective or lucky symbols. Hand of Fatima or Hamsa, depending on where in the world you're from, evil eye, horseshoes, wings, ladybugs, scarabs, swords. Celtic knots echo the ancient Heracles knot and symbolize an infinite union. Infinity rings symbolize the same, while wedding and engagement rings are, at their very core, jewelry as magical symbol. Remember how, in the first episode, I mentioned that the majority of the world wears their wedding rings on the ring finger of their left hand, which is a tradition simply because the ancient Romans mistakenly believed that there was a vein running from that finger straight to the heart. We may no longer rely on jewelry to communicate spiritual and social beliefs to our peers in quite the same way, as mass production and fast fashion have made it so that everyone can stuff their jewelry boxes to overflowing, but there is still a potent layer of magical symbolism inherent in many of the forms of jewelry that we take for granted. And so we've come to the end, and I cannot believe that after 3 30-minute episodes, I still feel like I have barely scratched the surface of this very, very deep dive. I mean, honestly, that one's on me. I don't know why I looked at this topic and naively thought that it was going to be something we could... that's on me. I don't know why I looked at this topic and naively thought that this is something we could cover in 2 podcast episodes and a few videos. But here we are. We're going to have to come back to this deep dive sometime in the future. If you enjoyed this podcast episode, please leave me a rating and review wherever you are listening to this. If you, too, would like to join the people who are voting on future video topics and get a bonus video of your own every month, you can join me at patreon.com/ancienthistoryjewelrystories at the $5 a month tier, or you can now subscribe on Instagram. There should be a little subscriptions button on my profile. If you don't know where you can watch my videos and you have somehow made it through all 3 episodes of this, or even worse, you've only listened to 1, you can find my videos at TikTok, Instagram, or YouTube under the username moonhoney.jewelry. If, like me, you are incensed about what the Spanish did to the Americas and you want your very own That Asshole Christopher Columbus tote bag, you can find all of my fancy merch at merch.shopmoonhoney.com. I had a few people tell me that they were getting a weird website is not secure error when trying to visit the site. That was my fault. I set up the domain forwarding wrong. I fixed it, so it is secure. I've also got... If you want to see my goldsmithing work and the jewelry that I make, you can find that at shopmoonhoney.com. Once again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening, and I will see you in 2 weeks for more ancient history jewelry stories. I haven't stressed this for our pre-Columbian cultures, but in every single one, it seems that both men and women wore nearly all forms of jewelry, with very few restrictions, such as the labrets being restricted to warriors and nobility. Though I will say, very honestly, that I don't know enough to say that there weren't also female warriors in many of these cultures. I had initially intended to continue this conversation through the Byzantine Empire, medieval Europe, and a little closer to modern times, but in the interest of not overwhelming everyone with another 2,000 years of information, I think we will leave that off for another time. I have a feeling I'm going to be picking up this deep dive again in the future. I will, instead, list some of the examples of jewelry as magical symbol that are still in use today. Some of these we covered, some we didn't, but almost all of them have ancient roots and can be traced back to a culture far removed from our modern globalized world. Some of the most obvious ones are going to be religious symbols. Your garden variety cross, crucifix, St. Christopher medallion, Star of David, chai symbol. There are various forms of prayer beads, whether worn around the neck or simply carried in your pocket, used in Islam, various forms of Buddhism, and by Christians. Then we have your protective or lucky symbols. Hand of Fatima or Hamsa, depending on where in the world you're from, evil eye, horseshoes, wings, ladybugs, scarabs, swords. Celtic knots echo the ancient Heracles knot and symbolize an infinite union. Infinity rings symbolize the same, while wedding and engagement rings are, at their very core, jewelry as magical symbol. Remember how, in the first episode, I mentioned that the majority of the world wears their wedding rings on the ring finger of their left hand, which is a tradition simply because the ancient Romans mistakenly believed that there was a vein running from that finger straight to the heart. We may no longer rely on jewelry to communicate spiritual and social beliefs to our peers in quite the same way, as mass production and fast fashion have made it so that everyone can stuff their jewelry boxes to overflowing, but there is still a potent layer of magical symbolism inherent in many of the forms of jewelry that we take for granted. And so we've come to the end, and I cannot believe that after 3 30-minute episodes, I still feel like I have barely scratched the surface of this very, very deep dive. I mean, honestly, that one's on me. I don't know why I looked at this topic and naively thought that it was going to be something we could... that's on me. I don't know why I looked at this topic and naively thought that this is something we could cover in 2 podcast episodes and a few videos. But here we are. We're going to have to come back to this deep dive sometime in the future. If you enjoyed this podcast episode, please leave me a rating and review wherever you are listening to this. If you, too, would like to join the people who are voting on future video topics and get a bonus video of your own every month, you can join me at patreon.com/ancient history jewelry stories at the $5 a month tier, or you can now subscribe on Instagram. There should be a little subscriptions button on my profile. If you don't know where you can watch my videos and you have somehow made it through all 3 episodes of this, or even worse, you've only listened to 1, you can find my videos at TikTok, Instagram, or YouTube under the username moonhoney.jewelry. If, like me, you are incensed about what the Spanish did to the Americas and you want your very own That Asshole Christopher Columbus tote bag, you can find all of my fancy merch at merch.shopmoonhoney.com. I had a few people tell me that they were getting a weird website is not secure error when trying to visit the site. That was my fault. I set up the domain forwarding wrong. I fixed it, so it is secure. I've also got... If you want to see my goldsmithing work and the jewelry that I make, you can find that at shopmoonhoney.com. Once again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening, and I will see you in 2 weeks for more ancient history jewelry stories.